Welcome back, everybody, and to this first session. Before I introduce our speaker, just three housekeeping points. First thing to note is the conference is being recorded, and obviously that only really affects us in terms of who's on screen and things like that, but it's important you know that. Please submit questions through to the session for Joe through the platform. So I'll be able to pick them up from there, and then we'll have a couple of minutes at the end to put them to Joe. So please put them forward as Joe's talking, and we'll collect them up, and we can put as many as we've got time for at the end to Joe. And also please spread the message more widely. So please post about the conference on your various socials using the hashtag #MakeItPublic. Now, in my opening remarks, I made the clear link between transparency and patient experience and involvement. And so it's both fitting and not a coincidence that our first comes from a patient perspective. And in my opening remarks, I also said that Make It Public set out 4 fundamental pillars of transparency. And I also indicated that we're doing well on 2 and not so well on 2 others. Well, the one where we have the most work to do is feeding back to participants. And so it's really great that that's what our first talk is going to be about. Now, traditionally, I would say a little bit about Jo, introduce her, but the whole point is to hear about Jo in her own voice, in her own words. And so I actually won't say much more. What I will say, though, is that Jo is one of those people who we are all very fortunate to have around. When people who take their own difficult, traumatic, challenging experiences where anyone would be completely forgiven and understood if they just focused on dealing with whatever they had to deal with themselves and their families, but they don't do that. They take that and they share it with others and try to help others. And that's inspiring and humbling. And I'm sure by the end of this talk, you'll agree with me on that. So without further ado, Jo, I welcome you to the Make It Public conference and ask you to kick us off.
Thank you, Matt. That's an honour to be here, and thanks for the introduction. So yeah, I'm Jo Taylor, and my story is back in February 2007, I was out on a night out with my husband. This is our picture, and this is what happened the next day was completely and utterly life-changing for me, because I found a breast lump. Didn't know anything about breast cancer, and yeah, that is kind of a very poignant picture to me, that life did completely change from that day to the next. My story is that I was 38. A young woman with 2 young children. It was a massive shock to me to get breast cancer. Didn't have any cancer in the family. Had 2 young children, as I said. One was 2.5, my son. My daughter was just 5 months old. And here we are, probably about a month after I was diagnosed, with my daughter's christening. And I was ready to have a mastectomy. I was still on maternity leave. So I literally went from pregnancy, maternity leave, into menopause, which was pretty harsh in itself. I had the standard kind of treatment that everybody has, with a kind of a bog standard stage 2, grade 2 cancer, mastectomy reconstruction, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, septum for a year, 2.5 years of Zoladex, and 5 years of tamoxifen, and then you kind of sent on your way, everything's kind of fine, and finished all that in February 2012. Just a few pictures there of me cold capping, which was, 14 years ago, quite new. I've just had my first treatment on the next picture, and the last picture was my daughter's first birthday, and it was kind of near the end of treatment there. So I did have a bit of a light bulb moment in an idea, because I found that patients didn't have the kind of choices that I wanted to have, and that my initial one was to do with reconstruction, and I wanted more of a choice of what I could have. Didn't seem to have it at the hospital that I had. So I wanted a one-stop shop, a website. I wanted it to have informed choices on there, signposting. I blogged about it. I shared all this information on social media. And it was, you know, for patients worldwide, and it was kind of a unique patient perspective. It wasn't a leaflet that you were getting from a hospital. And I actually launched it on the 15th of February 2013, which was 6 years after I was diagnosed. I became a patient advocate, knowledgeable in, like research and going to research conferences as that expert patient. I became an influencer in the world of breast cancer, tried to lobby government, MPs, raising the profile of secondary breast cancer, helped to build online communities. I'm actually one of the founder members of a Twitter chat, which is #BCCWW, which is normally held every Tuesday night. And then I became founder recently of Met Up UK, which is an advocacy and campaigner and activism group for metastatic breast cancer. So my involvement was that I got involved as a representative within Greater Manchester and the Breast Pathway Board, and involved in public and patient involvement. I'm part of the steering group for the Experimental Cancer Medicine Centre, helped to create a local face-to-face cancer group, spoke at events like this and conferences to try and share that story again, so that people, researchers, clinical people, whoever they are aware of the issues that patients have. And I have become known by patients and professionals worldwide. You know, I attend conferences, you know, in Europe, like Westmore, and ABC 6 actually is going to be held this this weekend. And like my life was getting back to, you know, that normal. But then everything changed a year after. You know, I just launched this website. I was actually diagnosed with secondary breast cancer, you know, near enough a year later. So that was 7 years into my diagnosis of primary breast cancer. So re-diagnosed as incurable and in effect terminal, treatment every 3 weeks, scans every 3 months. And like I said, I am 7 years into what is a 2 to 3 year median life survival. Of course, people live shorter, people live longer, and luckily I'm one of those people who are living 7 years out from diagnosis. I'm about to have my 125th treatment today, and I am what we class as #busy living with meds. I'm here to kind of promote that, you know, if we get all these things right, the right treatment, the right surgeries, the right radiotherapies, the right clinical trials, actually we can live longer with better drug access, better access to all these services, to make it really personalised care, because at the moment it really isn't. This is the reality, what I've had of secondary breast cancer. Lost my hair 4 times. It's a horrible thing to actually lose your hair as a woman, and probably as a man as well. But, you know, really, really hard when you go through treatments and, you know, you've got to have chemotherapy and you lose it. Surgeries, the middle one is actually what's called a sternotomy. So I had cardiothoracic surgery, I had metastatic secondary breast cancer in my sternum, and I got the opportunity to choose whether I wanted to have most of that removed to give me better survival, and I opted for that. Same again with the neck resection. On the right hand side, I actually had a full neck resection, taking all the lymph nodes out of there, because again, secondary breast cancer had gone into those areas. And I had radiotherapy on the shoulder. I've had it in various places in, you know, in the like the chest area. Last year under lockdown, 2nd of April, I was diagnosed with a brain metastases, so secondary breast cancer in the brain, actually in the cerebellum. So I had to go through SRS, which is stereotactic radiotherapy surgery, basically targeted radiotherapy to my head. So I was just showing off the the little areas where it had taken the hair, which was targeted. And then unfortunately as well, in the July, I had to have surgery under my left side, the original right side breast cancer, but left side. I had lymph node involvement there. And this is after my surgery. I ended up with a huge seroma under my arm, which was very painful and very annoying. Finally got it sorted out, but that would took about 4 months for that to settle down, which was really, really hard to deal with. One of the things that I picked up on was something what came out of some information on Twitter. There was a post in there from Medical Express, and it actually says for primary disease that after you have breast cancer, you always get these dissemination of cancer cells. Breast cancer is no longer considered as a curable disease. It's now considered a chronic disease because 10 or 20 years later, you can get secondary tumours because of the metastasizing cells. Now, that's really important to me because people call secondary breast cancer a chronic disease, but actually it's not a chronic disease because we are not living 10 to 20 years later. But primary disease, if people don't know, when they're going to get, or if they are going to get secondary disease, then perhaps it should be called a chronic disease because of the long-term and lasting side effects there. And another thing I'd like to point out as well is that we don't even count secondary breast cancer patients. I know that there are steps that are going to help to resolve that with an audit by the NHS, but we won't actually get the results of that until 2023, which is quite a while off when you have a 2 to 3 year median life expectancy. And what did I find out about secondary breast cancer? That actually you're not told. Many clinical people don't tell you or inform you about secondary breast cancer symptoms, red flag symptoms, because they tell me it's too scary. Yes, it's scary, but we need to be informed. And they tell patients to just, go and live your life, what you're waiting for. But I find that patients need to be empowered. Patients are often dismissed by the GPs, especially if they go back with a problem and they don't always know to return to a clinical setting or, what to talk to their GP about. Will they dismiss them? And I do sometimes always find that, clinicians have a bit of a paternalistic approach, which I find unacceptable. Oh, you don't need to bother about that. It's not a problem. You're getting older. These are the things that I've heard. You're older. You will have problems with your bones, things like that, which is unacceptable. We need to take people's, issues and make sure that we don't dismiss them. So one of the things that I actually did was create an infographic. I'll briefly show this because there's one for ductal breast cancer and there's one for lobular breast cancer. I know there's a lot of information on there, but you can actually find that on my website. But NHS England actually signpost to this now because they've found it so empowering and the information is really good because it's been ratified by clinical people and clinical nurse specialists. And we need to be aware of these red flags of where we metastasize to. This is the lobular one because with lobular cancer, it's different. And one of the things that I've done recently is present this to the Global Alliance, which is part of ABC6, which is going on this weekend. And I've actually got pharmaceutical to get them translated now into 11 different languages worldwide. So that's going to be very, very useful for patients across the world, which I'm really, really proud of. And again, lobular isn't always a lump. One of the other things that I do as well, I'm big into fitness, big into exercise, and I get patients, primary and secondary, to me in Saddleworth, and I deliver a weekend retreat for these patients, which I find is really important to get patients together. I do about 5 a year, been doing it for about 5 years now. But I think it's really important, not just the physical aspect, but the mental health aspect as well. These are just some pictures. This was the first retreat I did, and got lovely memories, and the patients absolutely love it. One of the other things that I've done recently as well, so this is with Met Up UK, which is the patient advocacy group for campaigning. So we did what was called a campaign for Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and it's called Darker Pink. So we've got 31 figures showing the 31 women that die every day of secondary breast cancer. You know, the figures are stark: 961 per month, nearly 11,500 every year. And we only have one day dedicated to a disease that is killing people. And we're trying to make that awareness. We actually have videos of people who, 31 women who have wanted to share their experience, and it's hard-hitting facts about mental health, PIP, you know, about the drug access, whatever it is. That's what we've been talking about. And these figures will hopefully be touring the UK as an art installation. And one of the things that I want, obviously, what I'm getting to here is, where does research actually fit in? Like I've said, secondary breast cancer is not a chronic disease. There are a small percentage of people living, you know, longer term, but there are actually as well people who are living a very short term, like triple negative breast cancer patients who only live up to 2 years. It's still incurable. We cannot tie everybody with the same brush that it's chronic, because it's not. Patients need to know about clinical trials along the whole of the pathway. We need to be kept informed of all our options, and waiting for patients until there are no further options to, you know, give them access to clinical trials is really no good. Recently, I know one of the charities actually said that clinical trials need to be threaded through clinical support, and actually it's the fact that we need that the whole way through the pathway, and it's not just clinical trials, it's access to drugs, it's access to surgeries, access to radiotherapies. We need that personalised approach to healthcare. And health research is so important to help treatment innovation. Patients need, I find that they need compassionate access, as well as a right to try the drug if possible. I find that trials are really too restrictive and only enroll what we call cancer Olympians, so the fittest, the healthiest people, and that just, again, seems to be wrong. Treatment lines are very restrictive. We find that a lot with the standard of care. Just 2 examples, just to give you an idea. A good example is a friend who, exactly the same as me, HER2 positive disease. She had burned through 3 treatment lines, so first line, second line, third line, within a year and a half. Got to the point where she had no other options. A clinical trial came up. She got access to that clinical trial, and there was a very small number of people who got access to that trial. 5 years later, she is living still well with she had brain metastases as well. She had brain involvement, and she's still living well on that clinical trial drug. So that, to me, is a really good example. Apart from the fact that now she's had a small lung nodal involvement, and she's now trying to have to find somewhere who will treat her to have that treated because of the differences around the UK. I find that really odd that she shouldn't just have that, you know, treatment and the radiotherapy on the nodule of the lung. The other example I want to give, which is a real poor example of another friend of mine, Angela, who she had a specific mutation of her cancer, again, secondary breast cancer. And because she'd had 2 prior chemotherapies, she wasn't able to access that clinical trial. And I found that was really, really poor and very restrictive, because she didn't get onto that trial. And unfortunately, Angela then died because she couldn't access a drug that possibly could have helped her. And we need that kind of support to extend our lives and not faced with a massively horrible time, a brick wall when you have progression. And just one last thought, this is a patient's wife who he actually died of melanoma, and Bettina Rill, she actually advocates for melanoma patients. And what she says, and I've heard her speak very, very passionately at Westmore about things like this: a drug you can't access, that's not innovation, that's an invention sitting on a shelf. Innovation happens when that drug is in a patient and gives good outcomes. And I think I will finish there. And if you want to connect with me, you can connect with me on these platforms. So thank you very much for listening.
Fantastic, Jo. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I think it's one of you've made it look very easy, but it's one of the unrecognised kind of costs, I think, of sharing experience, the kind of the emotion, the energy that I'm sure you've had to put into this over many years, and including today. And we really, really appreciate it. And when you get to see the comments in the chat, I think you'll be really pleased that people really kind of have appreciated you sharing your story today. So we've got time for just a couple of questions. First one is around, so in all the work you've done where you've been trying to kind of pull together information to support yourselves and others, how easy was it to draw that information from research? I'll leave the question there. I think I'm implying the answer, but there you go.
Yeah, hard. It's hard to actually get that information across. And actually, I mean, the NHS is a huge monster, isn't it, itself? And I think there belies the problems. It's a massive organisation that isn't nimble enough to actually make these changes that can really massively impact people's lives and change people's lives and change outcomes. Outcomes and survival are the one thing that we need, and that is the end game for us. And if we're not having better outcomes and better survival, what is the point of anything of this? What is the point of research? We really need to get better, quicker, faster. We just look at, I've not brought it up at all in the conference, but in my presentation, but COVID, everybody is seeing how quickly things can change and how we can, provide a vaccine so quick. And unfortunately, we know cancer is a very complex disease, but we need better. We need better for patients, because it's not acceptable for us to keep waiting and hanging on, especially for years to actually get these changes and even get similar things to other countries. They're way ahead of what we're doing. How are we going to be top of the game in the world if we don't change?
Brilliant. And there's a really often when we talk about transparency, we just talk about making things available. We don't often talk about time, but sort of transparency delayed is benefits denied, isn't it? That's the point. There are people that can benefit from knowledge, and it's one thing to release it at some point. It's another thing to release it quickly. That brings to another question, which is related, which is written in terms of the information you receive from medical staff around your treatment, but I think we can broaden it to research as well. And it says, I was wondering if Jo felt that medical staff were able to explain treatments, etc., to her and others in a way which you could relate to. Does making it public mean different ways of communicating as well as releasing the information? And so I put that to you.
Yeah, I mean, it isn't always written in layman's terms, but obviously it depends what kind of information is being shared, because you have to you have to tell people and explain people, you know, about medical terms and about medical, whether it's radiotherapy, whether it's a treatment, whether it's a drug. It's hard to actually put something into a very simplistic term. Something that I've been talking to a patient involvement group about doing, you know, short videos. Instead of actually having leaflets, then why don't we do short videos for patients, so that, you know, you can get the information across in a easier way, because patients just look at a leaflet and they either throw it in the bin or just stick it in a drawer somewhere. Do they actually read it? You know, if they had access to, you know, short videos, maybe that's a better way of delivering, you know, the information to patients.
Yeah, great point. And the work you've done on the infographic is exactly in that line, where you think more about the message, the information you're trying to convey, rather than just getting everything there. And I think often within research, we suffer from the understandable desire to convey a lot of information very precisely, very accurately, so that it's fully transparent. But in doing that, we often kind of take our eye off the real prize, which is conveying information to people. And so, you know, too much information worded too precisely in too long forms can often mean that nothing is taken in, nothing is understood, and it's actually less transparent, even though on paper it looks as if it's being transparent.
Yeah, and that's massively important for a patient, isn't it? When you know, it's their life in your hands at the end of the day.
A really good place to finish on, I think. We're out of time. It's been fantastic. I did want to read to you a few of the comments. We will share them all with you, Joe, but we've got things like, great talk, very moving, so inspirational, thank you for sharing, inspirational, people sharing their own personal stories and saying, you know, a similar kind of experience. So thanks, Joe, and thanks for everyone for listening.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.